My name is Ann Moser, and I know many of you, and I see some new friends to get to know. I work for Wisconsin Sea Grant. So you can advance the slide. Excuse me. So I'm here with my friend, Ginny Carlton. She's also an education specialist with Wisconsin Sea Grant. And we are here together with our Minnesota colleagues, Cole Fisher and Marty Kitson. So we both, our programs for Sea Grant, work cooperatively across the Great Lakes Basin with the other Sea Grant programs under the umbrella of the Center for Great Lakes Literacy. And we are grateful because the Center for Great Lakes Literacy, CEDL, receives funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And that is our funder. That's why we ask you to fill out forms of assessment. We report numbers back to our funding agency. So we do appreciate you taking that time. We have a new tradition now of reading a land acknowledgement statement. And I think when we consider history and maritime history, it's always important to remember that history didn't begin in the 1900s or the 1600s. History began generations ago, and this also includes our maritime history. So we are scattered around the upper Great Lakes. So I will read Madison's, where I'm sitting today, our statement, and I invite you to silently consider where you're sitting right now and the land that you occupy. So our acknowledgement in Madison reads, the UW occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW and myself respect the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the other 11 First Nations of Wisconsin. Thanks. Next slide. So we thought it might be fun to just kind of break some ice. So we're going to use the chat for your interaction today. I taught shipwrecks to the little learners, the 3 to 10-year-olds, for a long time. So I get to sing and dance and be really silly and create really bad art. And music has a strong connection to maritime history. You know, we hear about sea shanties and all that fun stuff. It's a really powerful way to tell the story. And I love music too. So it's kind of two passions of mine. So let's try our first question. Wait, now this is, I would sing for the kids, but I'm not going to sing for you, but I'm going to go ahead and play this song for you. I don't know if you can hear it, but we'll go for it. So go ahead if you know the answer to this, where this song is, this lyric is found, about what ship. And I'm not seeing any answers in the chat, so I'm wondering, just guess, everybody. Oh, B, we got a B. All right. So I'm impressed. So in fact, everybody done? I will reveal that the answer is B, Lost on the Lady Elgin, sung by, I'm not sure. This version is not, oh no, that's the next song. Sorry, I made a little boo-boo there. My notes are all over the page here. So this is a song written by a man in Minnesota about a shipwreck in Lake Michigan. Most of the people on the ship were from Milwaukee, and I love it because they were mostly of Irish descent, which is my heritage. And it's a great story. The Lady Elgin, it was on its way to Chicago to go to a political speech, and the Irish are going to go there and make some trouble, which they do really well. So kind of a fun story. All right, now the second song, go ahead and forward to the, there it is. And this is actually the song. I totally led you astray. I apologize. And so when I teach the little kids, I always tell them that there are clues everywhere. And I think we'll hear from Sophie and Caitlin about how they use clues in their investigations. So you see river, muddy, a lot of people, more than 800 people did not survive. So maybe there's some clues in there. And I wonder if you guys are knowing the answer to this. Kind of looking good. Anyone else want to try? Yes, in fact, it is D. This song was written and performed by Tom Castle. He's a Madison performer and songwriter. He's actually been a backup captain to the Dennis Sullivan, for those of you that have been on the tall ship of Wisconsin. And this is also kind of an interesting story. It went down right on the edge of the river, even in dock. You know, a lot of people died. It's one of the biggest tragedies in shipwreck history. And I thought it was interesting. They salvaged the boat and turned it into a gunboat for the U.S. Navy called the USS Willamette. I'm not sure who would want to be the crew on a gunboat that was a shipwreck, but there you go. So great, thank you so much. So let's just advance slides. We'll come back to our folk music in a little bit. You should have seen our agenda. So here it is. It's pretty packed. So I'm not gonna, and there goes the garbage. It's Wednesday. The garbage trucks have to come by during our workshop. So there's our schedule. We'll be trying to stick to it as quick as possible. Respect your time as well. So we can go to the next slide. And we've been playing some information for you. So just to remind you that you hopefully have gotten the Z link for the workshop Google site. It's filled with really wonderful materials that will stay up after the workshop is over. So you will have access to it as long as you want. And it's got a lot of resources in there. So definitely take a look at it. And it also has the bios about who's in the room with us today. You can turn the next slide. And we love to be connected to you. If you use Twitter, there's our Twitter handle. We're trying to get a little bit better about doing that, but definitely sign up for our mailing list. On the front page of the seagull.org website, you'll see a little form. And that will tell you about opportunities that are happening, including, hurrah, the Lake Guardian Shipboard Workshop is finally happening. We had 2 years off, and this is an opportunity for teachers, educators to go aboard a real research vessel and work alongside of scientists. So really awesome opportunity. So you'll be hearing about that through the Seagull website and the Seagull email list. Next slide. Always our internet, you know all this. Just if you're having internet trouble, just turn your video off. I will, because mine always goes, wee, and then you see Anne moving in slow motion, which is not, it's amusing, but it's a little distracting. So without further ado, I think we're ready to get started. So I love this part of doing this job is to do the introduction, because we always will have these amazing professionals join us. And to hear about this professional practice through the eyes of a real archaeologist is a gift. And I do want to acknowledge that this is, first, acknowledge our teachers. You guys have been through HELL in the last year. So the fact that you're online with us is a gift. And so we really appreciate it. So hopefully it'll be an inspiring morning for you. I also want to really thank our archaeologists. They're really in the midst of their field season. This is a super busy time for them. They've carved it out because they value education like you do. So just understand that we're really grateful and that they're taking time out of their busy field season. So for me, thank you very much. So without further ado, I'm introducing Caitlin Zant. She will do our, what we used to call science talk, but we're going to talk our research talk. So Caitlin is a maritime archaeologist with the Wisconsin Historical Society in their Maritime Preservation and Archaeology program. So just a reminder that archaeology is not just terrestrial, it's also aquatic, marine. In her years working as a maritime archaeologist, Caitlin has been involved in over 50, that's a lot to me, archaeological projects, especially when you hear what all goes into it, and has assisted in over 25 shipwrecks that got on the national and state registers of historic places. And I hope you mentioned that, Caitlin, because that's a very interesting aspect, or if somebody wants to ask about that a little bit. To me, it was a new thing that I learned about shipwrecks being in that collection. She's an active member of the Wisconsin Underwater Archaeology Association and the Association for Great Lakes Maritime History and the Advisory Council for Underwater Archaeology. So take it away, Caitlin.
Hi, everyone. Anne, thank you for having me here. I always like to join in. Also, I might have, as Anne said, I might have something going by at some point in time. So just don't worry too much about that. Oops, I hit the wrong thing. Okay, let me see if I can get this going. All right, hopefully everybody can see that. I will go ahead and start with it. It looks like my camera pulled out a little bit. So anyway, you can see me in front of my bookshelf here. Okay. As Anne mentioned, I'm one of the maritime archaeologists here for the state of Wisconsin. We work for the Wisconsin Historical Society. Right now there's 3 of us in our office. There's myself, Tamara Thompson, and then Sophie, who you will hear from a little bit later today. So generally, when I first tell people that I'm a maritime archaeologist, people immediately think Indiana Jones or pyramids or the Holy Grail or something that they've seen in media or, anything to do with that. And then once, I kind of explain this, like, yes, it's kind of similar to that, but it's also, it's underwater. Then the next question I get is, or the next thing that I get is, pirates are so awesome. Like, how much gold have you found? And then I have to tell people, unfortunately, that we haven't found any gold in Lake Michigan, even though there's stories out there that say there is some, there isn't really any. So then after this, we kind of have a little bit more, talk a little bit more. And then the next 2 things that I get questions about are this ship, which is not a Wisconsin shipwreck, but is personally one of my favorite things. As a kid, I loved Titanic and everything to do with it. And then the other thing that everybody knows about Wisconsin or Great Lakes maritime history is the Edmund Fitzgerald. Because of the song, because of the, kind of myth that has developed around this wreck as well. Not myth, but I should say story that has developed around this song. And so all of these different pieces are definitely part of maritime history. But maritime history goes a lot further than that. It's not just these big famous shipwrecks where a lot of people died or these, really harrowing stories. There's all these bits and pieces of maritime archaeology that are really a part of what maritime archaeology is, and especially here in the Great Lakes. So just at its base, maritime archaeology is the study of humans' interaction with the water. So that could be the ocean, lakes, rivers, any kind of body of water, really. And it's the study through the associated physical remains left behind. So it, in a lot of cases, is shipwrecks, but not always just shipwrecks. It's a lot of, there's a lot of different components to it. We have, we study docks, we study prehistoric sites, port cities, old waterfronts, harbors, trade patterns, like different industries such as fishing or small boat building. And all these different kind of things come together, including, old submerged landscapes when the Great Lakes, when most of the water that's now in the Great Lakes was caught up during the last ice age, and water levels were a lot lower. So there's a lot of components to it of things that are now underwater that people don't automatically think of when you think of maritime archaeology. And it's also, as I mentioned, non-tangible things that we study too. So it's these, fishing routes and how port cities developed and different trade routes, and different things that have changed over time. And we're really trying to understand how humans have used the water over a certain period of time and really how they moved. So a lot of times after we kind of go through this and I explain a little bit of what maritime archaeology is, people start to ask, they're like, oh, that sounds really cool, but why is it something that you study? Why is this something important? It's, it's underwater. We don't need to think about that anymore. And in college, I was a history major. So a lot of times I just go back to the old adage that, if you learn more about the past, it can help, tell you about the present. And then again, make decisions and learn things for the future. But really archaeology and maritime archaeology goes a step further. Because a lot of times what we have in historical records, it depends on who wrote that particular history down or what in particular was written down. And in many cases, there is no recorded written history about a certain period of time. And so with archaeology and maritime archaeology, you can go back and discover things and in the historical record that hadn't been written down. And so you can understand a lot more about a particular time period or a particular culture or a particular region based on the actual physical remains that you find behind. So, you have all of these movements of people along waterways for hundreds of thousands of years. And so this is really, we get to know all about these movements, and we can tell different things and learn different patterns about people, even when they weren't written down necessarily. So much of human history was developed along waterways. So it was the major way, today we think of, Lake Michigan, oh, it's in the way, I need to get to Michigan. It's in my way and I have to go all the way around it. But really for, thousands of years, waterways were the primary method of transportation of getting from point A to point B. They really were these super highways of their period of time. And even today they still are. But they were really this transportation corridor. And so you find a lot of human history that developed along these waterways, and a lot of that is now underwater. And so we can really try to understand why certain places developed and how they developed in that certain way. So here in the Great Lakes, how do we do this? Maritime archaeology is something that is done across the world. It's, basically everywhere that there's water, there has been some sort of maritime archaeological research that has been done there. But here specifically in the Great Lakes, we try to record primarily shipwrecks, but again, other docks and different wharves and any kind of submerged cultural resources. We try to record them in great detail, take note of all of the artifacts that we have. And basically what we're trying to understand with the shipwreck itself is, what was the ship carrying when it went down? Why did it sink? If we don't know the name of the ship, what is the name of the ship? We also try to figure out, what the crew was doing in the moments just before the sinking, and kind of get all these little insights into shipboard life aboard the vessel just before it sank. A lot of times these, wrecking events were recorded in local newspapers. However, it doesn't give you a lot of details, especially when not very many of the survivors made it to shore, or none of the survivors made it to shore. What we do in archaeology can really tell us a little bit more about that, and we can understand and help solve some things that used to be, that were mysteries for many, many years, and we can figure out what had happened to them. So to do this, we do scale drawings in many cases. Here you see an image. This is the schooner Northerner, and you can see a bunch of volunteer archaeologists. We use a lot. There's only, we're a small office, so we use a lot of volunteer divers. And they're basically, they're doing an archaeological project. And so we run a tape measure down the length of the ship, and then we use tape measures. Just very simple tape measures and straight rulers, basically anything you would use in drafting on the surface, we use underwater. And what they're doing is they're drawing everything that they see and measuring it to scale, so that then we can take that drawing and put it onto, make a pencil drawing, and then we ink that drawing, and then we make a digital version of the shipwreck itself. We also, we do that, as you saw, in deep water. It's the same method when we move into shallow water. Not all shipwrecks are in deep water. We have a lot of them that are very, very shallow. And so here you can see volunteers doing exactly that, just kind of drawing what it is that they see and taking measurements of everything. We also take a lot of photos and video. We want to record any artifacts that we find on the site as well, so we understand what we're looking at, and again, to kind of understand what in particular the ship was carrying or what it was doing. And you can see here we have a few of those. We also use side scan sonar and different multi-beam sonar and different types of remotely operated vehicles to go underwater to record some of these shipwrecks, especially in a low visibility type of situation. We're really lucky here in the Great Lakes. Double-edged sword. We have, visibility in the Great Lakes now that the invasive mussels have moved in. So in many cases, we are able to see what it is that we're doing. But there are still cases where we have low or poor visibility. And so that's when we send a remotely operated vehicle in. We also do the same thing when we have a very deep shipwreck as well, that it's not safe for divers to necessarily be underwater that whole time. So we take all these measurements, we record all these drawings, and we use photos and videos And as I was mentioning, when we do these inked drawings, you can see us in the lower right-hand corner there. That's when we're actually taking the notes that we take underwater and we are transposing them to do this technical drawing onto graph paper. And then on the bottom left-hand side, you can see one of those digitized drawings. So all of that was recorded and put in and drawn by hand. And so we have that there. However, when we have a wreck that's a little bit deeper, that we're not as comfortable, having divers in, or the wreck is too big or it's in too deep a water, we take a series of, thousands of images to be able to put together a photogrammetry, essentially. And so we're making this to scale still model of the shipwreck that's usually downward looking, or photo mosaic, I should say. We also do photogrammetry, but for a photo mosaic. And so that you can see in the upper picture here, the schooner or the steamer Lakeland. It's a 210-foot long shipwreck and 210 feet of water. So on a site like that, we don't want divers, staying in the water for a super long time. So they're able to drop down, take a series of images of the wreck, and then come up out of the water and they're stitched together. And then as always, we have a little diver for scale, so it's still all a scaled image. Moving beyond that too, as I mentioned, the photogrammetry and 3D imaging, this is a newer area that maritime archaeology is going into. And it's really handy because we're able to, again, take a lot of these images of pictures, spend a little bit less time underwater, but then we're able to use a computer program to insert those pictures, and it creates these 3D models for us. So you can see on the the right-hand side, a series of 3 different wrecks that we've done this 3D imaging on, and it's a really great tool to be able to show people what these wrecks look like. And when they're posted online, you could kind of zoom in and spin around and take a look at them. And they're all done to scale, and they're all incredibly detailed, which is really neat to see. On the left-hand side here, you can see actually a change model that we were able to create out of working with Michigan Technological University on a shipwreck in Wisconsin called the Wisconsin. So basically with this particular wreck, divers were reporting that the wreck was collapsing a lot faster. It's an iron shipwreck. So we wanted to understand if this was actually happening. And so we had, video from the past, and then we were able to go back and take additional video and make different 3D models and essentially put them on top of each other and do some subtraction. So we actually have measurable data demonstrating how much the ship has changed over a 10-year period. And what we found is that the ship has changed a lot. So anywhere you see blue, that means that in 2005, there was something there, and then in 2015, that was gone or had moved. And anywhere you see red, that's where there hadn't been something before, and there is something there now. So basically what we found is that the ship is degrading, and it's likely due to the zebra and quagga mussel infestation that's now occurring in the lakes. And so that's kind of a new area that we're going to understand degradation of shipwrecks in Lake Michigan as well. So as I mentioned before, we use a lot of volunteers. So we go out and do these projects every summer using the volunteers to help us draw and record and do a lot of the video and photography that we do underwater. And then we try to put these all together and create extensive histories. So through these week-long projects, 2-week-long projects that we have every summer, when we come back, we do all the historical research. We also have volunteers that help us with that. And then we put together these stories, both with the underwater research that we did and telling that story, but then also the history of the ship as well. And then as Anne mentioned before, many of these shipwrecks have national significance. And so we work then towards putting that all together and submitting a National Register of Historic Places nomination. And then submitting that to the state review board, and then it moves on to the National Park Service to get ultimate designation. And as of right now, we have 75 shipwrecks listed on the National Register of Historic Places in Wisconsin. And that's the most individually listed shipwrecks of any state that we have. But we've also assisted in in getting many of the states around Wisconsin and the Great Lakes down that process to try to start recording their shipwrecks on the National Register. So we've done a lot of work in Minnesota with the group, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Preservation Society. to help get a lot of their shipwrecks listed on the National Register. And then over in Lake Erie as well, we've been working with the National Museum of the Great Lakes out there to help list some shipwrecks on the National Register. Here you can see just in a little bit more detail that drawing process that I was saying. So we bring up information from the bottom, we do a technical drawing of it on graph paper, and then we go ahead and ink it and create our new thing. And so when we do this, it's not just for academia. We're not just trying to do this for ourselves to learn about this and, and National Register stuff. We also try to share this history with the public. So one of the big kind of arms of our research is doing this outreach and education component. And so we have a series of buoys all over the state. So we're able to have kayakers and divers access these shipwrecks safely and easily so that they're not damaged. We also have a series of maritime trails markers all up and down the coastline, so people don't have to be divers, don't have to get in the water, and they can actively take part in the maritime history of the Great Lakes. So one of the things that's also really interesting to me when I talk to people is that when we talk about shipwrecks, this is kind of the imagery that a lot of people think of. You have, it's just people assume it's all in the ocean, or that any shipwreck underwater kind of ends up looking like this beautiful, colorful coral reef that you have in this crystal clear blue water. But one of the big differences you have is in the ocean, you have something called a teredo worm. And so these worms will eat basically they're kind of like, they're wood boring worms. And so they'll eat any wood that's not covered up by something. And so a lot of times, unless you're in really deep water in the ocean, you don't get a lot of remains of wooden shipwrecks. So a lot of the shipwrecks that you see do look like this. They're metal, they're covered in coral, and they're kind of, looking like this beautiful underwater, colorful sanctuary. But many people don't realize that a lot of people don't even realize that we have shipwrecks here in the Great Lakes. I get that question a lot. But there's a very big difference in what they look like. So this is the Shipwreck Vernon, which is located in Lake Michigan. And again, it's a wooden shipwreck, and it looks pretty much like it could sail off the bottom, except for we have that invasive zebra and quagga mussels that cover basically every surface under Lake Michigan these days. And so it's a little bit different of how it looks, but we have the cold, dark, clear, low oxygenated water in Lake Michigan and Lake Superior, all the Great Lakes, really helps with this preservation. And so that's why for us, a lot of times we don't bring anything up out of the water either. We record everything as it is underwater, because the water itself does a great job of preserving these wrecks. The metal shipwrecks we're finding might be a little bit different story, but with all of our wooden shipwrecks, we know that they are very well preserved in this cold, dark environment, and so that's why we leave everything there. So in the Great Lakes, as you saw, we had, we have wood that's preserved, but we also have all of these other materials that get preserved, which is really exciting when you go to look at shipwrecks, and can really help. We get a lot of information from these. So this is from the shipwreck of the Lakeland, and it was carrying a load of automobiles when it sank. And so as you can see, there is this automobile that is still, we have quite a few shipwrecks in Lake Michigan that were carrying automobiles. And so the cars, except for being crushed and kind of thrown about during the sinking event, are almost entirely intact. There's, glass that's intact. Here you can see the rubber wheel that's intact, all the different components of it that are still down there and still easy to see. And then up in Lake Superior, so both in the Wisconsin portion and in all the parts of Lake Superior, we don't have the invasive mussel infestation, and the water is that much colder and darker and deeper in a lot of cases. And so you have things like paint that are really well preserved. And so here you can see this is the schooner Moonlight, because the paint on the side of the vessel still says Moonlight. And we find this with a lot of the wrecks, both in Wisconsin and Minnesota that we've worked on, that you can see, writing on the side of ships. There's one particular one in Minnesota called the Harriet Bee. And throughout its life, it had various iterations. And one of the really neat things is it's in about 650 feet of water. So we sent an ROV down there, but you can see that the name had changed over the years. And all they had done is put paint over the old name and then write the new name on the side. And so now that it's been underwater long enough, layers of that paint are starting to disappear. And so you can actually see little bits of every single name that the ship had ever been called, just because of the way that the paint is kind of degrading or is kind of come off of it. So it's really exciting to see that and just be able to confirm that, yes, what shipwreck are you looking at? Well, it says Moonlight, so we're looking at the Moonlight. We know this makes that part of our job very easy in identifying shipwrecks. So, talking about the Great Lakes and maritime archaeology, as educators, you guys all know, what the Great Lakes look like, obviously. But so most of the work, since I work for the state of Wisconsin, most of the work that I do and most of my examples and most of the things are located in Wisconsin waters. But as I mentioned earlier, we partner with different organizations all across the Great Lakes to be able to get work done and share research and kind of help get a lot of these important shipwrecks on the National Register, because really, the story of the Great Lakes isn't just the story of Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan. It really was this water highway. And so everything in the Great Lakes is connected. And so were all these stories. We have many shipwrecks in Wisconsin. They're considered Wisconsin shipwrecks, but the only reason they're in Wisconsin was because that's just happened to be where they sank. They were going to Chicago from Buffalo and they weren't planning on stopping anywhere in Wisconsin, but they happened to run into a storm in Wisconsin and sink. So really, it's this regional story that we try to tell about all these shipwrecks. And really, why we have so many shipwrecks in the Great Lakes is because it was this water highway. And in places like Wisconsin and someplace like Duluth or, anywhere on the western portion of the Great Lakes, it was really the western terminus for this major highway. And so a lot of ships were trying to get to these places and kind of using them as jumping off points for then moving further westward. So really a lot of the, conversation about the expansion of the United States westward really starts with the Great Lakes, because traveling via the waterways was a lot more up until the 1870s. It was sorry if you can hear a horn. It was the easiest way for people to get from point A to point B. And it was a lot more reliable than the rail lines at the time as well. So here we have that western terminus of the Great Lakes. And this is really where a lot of people came when immigrants were starting to move into the area. They all came through the ports along the western portion of the Great Lakes, both in Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. And so there was just a lot of traffic. And so that's why we have a lot of shipwrecks. In Wisconsin specifically, I get the question a lot, how many shipwrecks are there in the Great Lakes? I don't know, upward like thousands, tens of thousands, in some cases. There's different estimates for all over the place. But in Wisconsin specifically, we know that historically, there are records of about 750 different shipwrecks, and that's both in Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. And of those 750 shipwrecks, we know of about where just over 200 of them are. So there's still a lot out there. There's still a lot to be found, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And then these numbers are probably similar, if not low, for a lot of other places in the Great Lakes as well, just because, out east, you have a lot longer history of people sailing on the wrecks. So one of the things I really like to point out when talking about the state of Wisconsin and maritime is that the Wisconsin state seal, this is the official state seal of Wisconsin, has a lot of maritime pieces to it that people don't really realize. And so you can really show people how important the maritime industry was to the state of Wisconsin by just looking at this seal. So there are 3 different maritime references on this map. One, the easiest to see is the sailor. So you have the sailor and the miner, which were, at the time Wisconsin became a state, those were the 2 most important industries here in Wisconsin. Then you also have the anchor as well, which is pretty self-explanatory. Then the very last maritime symbol is actually this arm. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the arm and hammer down here in the bottom left-hand corner. And so that was put on here to demonstrate prowess in industry, that Wisconsin has this great industrial component to it. But what that actually is a caulking mallet that was used in shipbuilding. And so it was used to pound oakum and like tar into the cracks of the hull of a shipwreck, and then that helped make the ship, or not shipwreck, into a ship, and that helped make the ship watertight. And so that was put on here to demonstrate prowess in industry, because Wisconsin did have a lot of shipbuilding places in its early history, and that's something that people don't really think about. So that's always, if you want a fun fact of trivia, that's always what I like to share with people. So I'm just here at the end going to go through a couple of different examples of shipwrecks that we have here in Wisconsin. So we have a lot of different types of shipwrecks. We have shallow shipwrecks, deep shipwrecks, wooden, metal, big, small, any kind, you name it. So I'll just go through a couple that really demonstrate, the different, types of, important nationally significant shipwrecks that we have here in Wisconsin. So this one here, this is an image of the ocean wave. It was what's called a scow schooner. So a very boxy ship. As you can see here, this is the bow or the front of the ship. It doesn't have that nice point to it like a lot of other shipwrecks do, or ships do. It was built in 1860 and it sank in 1869. And it's located up in Door County, Wisconsin, at about 100 feet of water. One of the old adages was, if you can build a barn, you can build a scow. Because you didn't have to have shipwright skills. You didn't have to know how to, build these nice ship's lines. It was basically a box. It had a flat bottom, flat sides. It was basically, if you knew how to build a barn, you could build a scow. And so these were really important to a lot of early immigrants coming to Wisconsin. So when a lot of immigrants first started out here, they built farms. But one of the only ways to get there, to make any money, was to get their goods to the larger markets of places like Milwaukee, Chicago, different cities like that. And so the easiest way to do that was via the water. And so they built a lot of these small scow schooners that went up and down the coast. And they were able to build them, not in a big shipyard, just kind of along the shore somewhere. And so especially Norwegian immigrants to Wisconsin made use of these. And that helped them kind of get established in the state. And then also a lot of these Norwegian families then became major shipping families in the Great Lakes. A lot of them went on to captain much larger vessels because of their experience that they got with these. So these are a really interesting and important part of Wisconsin's early immigrant history. And here you can see what, this isn't the ocean wave, but what a scow schooner would have looked like before sinking. And you can see it's got that very flat front and the sides are very flat. So it kind of is more like a modern day barge that you'd see on a river. And so this was something that was really important to that part of Wisconsin's history. Here you can see the site. A lot of it is still intact. It was, you can still see the cabin structure here that was intact. And what's neat with this one is you do have a lot of those components, like in artifacts that are found that were used by the crew and the captain on board the vessel. So it really tells a really interesting story of immigrant life in Wisconsin in the 1860s. Another one we have is the Wisconsin. I mentioned this one earlier. It's an iron passenger steamer. It was built in 1881 and it sank in 1929, and actually the same weekend that the stock market crashed in 1929. It's now located in about 120 feet of water off of Kenosha, Wisconsin. And it was a very unique part of Wisconsin history. So it primarily carried home goods and passengers. But one of the big things that's still an issue today is traffic in the city of Chicago. And so unfortunately, when manufacturers are trying to send goods, trains would get stuck in Chicago for hours at a time, and it was really unreliable getting any kind of merchandise through Chicago. So what different shipping companies started to do is that they would either build or rent out these vessels that would go across Lake Michigan. So like if the Badger Car Ferry today, it's also part of this process. So Lake Michigan had this long history of car ferries or just regular vessels that their main goal was to go all year round across Lake Michigan. And so Wisconsin was a part of this in the break bulk cargo portion of this trade. So basically, trains would pull up to the dock in either Michigan or Wisconsin. All the goods would be loaded onto these hand carts. The hand carts would be rolled onto the vessel. The ship would go across. On the other side, the crew would unload the hand carts and then put all the merchandise back onto another train car, and it would continue on its way. And so this helped, despite all that loading and unloading, it actually was a lot more reliable and faster to go across Lake Michigan. Even though these vessels got stuck in the ice a lot, it was still a lot more reliable. But so the Wisconsin had a 50-year-long history of doing this. And it was renamed 9 times. Here it is after it had a fire at one point in time, and so the upper portions of it were rebuilt, all entirely out of iron. But it's really interesting because it had a 50-year-long history, and it has these ties to a lot of major historical events in the United States, just by having been on the water for so very long. And it goes through this whole process. But at the time of its sinking, it was lost in a gale as it was leaving Chicago and heading north. And at the time of its sinking, it was carrying just these home goods. So like electrical cords, shoes, furniture, radiators, boxes full of buttons, boxes full of, other little, household items. There was tar paper all over. And so basically anything you could find in your modern big box store was on the vessel. So the vessel sank in this storm. And as you can see, this is the one that we've done the degradation surveys on. And it still sits there in about 120 feet of water, relatively intact. And so you can still go inside the hold and see what is in there. And here you can see those hand carts that they would roll on that are still on board. And then you can see all the different components. There's some furniture back here. There's some tar paper up front. And one of the really interesting things for this shipwreck with me is that it really kind of brings it to the front. This vessel sank in 1929. It's not that long ago. But it really just demonstrates, people almost 100 years ago still needed the same type of goods that we did. And so you can kind of see that represented in this vessel here. Here's some more images of that. The radiators that are all just stacked up in there, ready to go to a store and be sold. So here's the 3D image of the Wisconsin. As you can see, the Wisconsin is kind of the first step for us into this degradation study that we're attempting to do in the Great Lakes. And so this is what it looked like about 5 years ago. And we're looking to go back sometime soon and see how much it's changed even in the last 5 or 6 years or so. Another big metal shipwreck that we have here is the Milwaukee. It's probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous ship in Wisconsin waters. It was built out of iron and steel, and it was a true railroad car ferry. So it was the same process as with the Wisconsin. They're still trying to get goods across Lake Michigan, but eventually it developed. So this was built in 1903 and then sank in 1929. Again, the same weekend that the stock market crashed. There was a lot of bad storms that came through that particular weekend. So the difference with the Milwaukee, though, is instead of having to load and unload rail cars on the dock, they would just roll the rail cars right on board. And so this was a true railroad car ferry, which the Badger was as well before it went across, or before it became a passenger like vehicle car ferry. So it had 4 tracks along the inside of its deck, and it could hold up to 28 rail cars. And so it would go across, year round, same thing primarily between Milwaukee and Grand Haven, Michigan. Transporting mostly just these rail cars, but also sometimes passengers, but usually just the rail cars. So the Milwaukee left Milwaukee in the grip of a huge gale that most of the other ships decided not to go out in. The captain was named Heavy Weather McKay. Heavy Weather was his nickname because he always went out in crazy storms. Because they had to try to keep with the railroad times. And so it was basically, in any kind of weather, you would still try to go out. But they went out into this storm that were reported 40-foot waves, and they were never heard from again, other than bits and pieces of wreckage started showing up in Michigan. A lifeboat with a couple of sailors in it wearing Milwaukee life vests ended up on shore. No one survived from this particular wreck. But what's interesting about this is nobody really knew what happened. And so all of these myths started popping up about the vessel itself and like what might have happened. And this is actually one of the only substantiated shipwreck in a bottle cases that we have in Lake Michigan. And so this particular note gives a little bit of indication as to what was happening right before it sank. It's really hard to read, but basically it says the sea gate is bent in. So it had this gate on the back end to supposedly keep the water out. The flicker, which is the crew's quarters and right underneath the rail deck, is flooded. Things look bad. And this was dated the day of the sinking, and then also the time was about an hour before the bodies that washed ashore, that their watches had all stopped. So we knew this was right before the sinking. So basically, with this piece of information, the Seagate is bent in. One of the components that we, the myths that came up was that a rail car had broken loose and broken off the back end of the vessel, and that's why the vessel sank. But when we went down to do the actual survey of the wreck, the Seagate is broken, but this little W, as you can see, there's no damage to the inside of the Seagate, but the outside of the Seagate is definitely bent inward. And so we believe that a major wave, the vessel had turned around and was heading back towards Milwaukee. We know that from the note and the way the vessel's pointed on the bottom, is that the waves were coming out of the north, and so it would have hit the back end of the vessel, and they were likely strong enough to break the vessel, and then that allowed all the water to come into the vessel. It was carrying, like I said, rail cars. You can still see them. One of my favorite things to say that I've seen underwater is toilets, because this was carrying, there were 3 different rail cars full of Kohler bathroom fixtures. So again, this was, 1929 it sank. And so you can see here, there's a rail car. This is all sinks. Here, there's a bathtub right here. There's another whole rail car full of like toilet cisterns as well. And so it's just really something interesting. That's probably I get that question a lot too. Probably one of the oddest or most interesting things I found on a shipwreck. But here you can see it's, the pilot house popped off, and it is one of the most popular dive sites in Wisconsin today at about 120 feet of water. I know I'm running out of time here, so I'll just go really quick. The last 2 shipwrecks I have here, this is the Walter B. Allen. It is a sailing canaler. So basically just a wooden schooner, but it was built specifically to fit through the Welland Canal. So that's the canal that goes around Niagara Falls that connects Lake Ontario to Lake Erie. And so these to me are super interesting because they were all built to exact specifications to fit inside that lock dimensions, because they were trying to fit absolutely as much cargo as they possibly could at one time. And so these vessels were built very boxy. They have a flat bottom, flat sides. They're a certain length and length. And then they also have all these interesting components to them. This particular one, this is like the one that I was talking about. It didn't sink in Wisconsin originally. It sank in Michigan. They got a pump. You can see the pump. They pumped out all the water. They sailed it back they were going to drop it off in Manitowoc. The Manitowoc wouldn't take it, so they started sailing south to Milwaukee. Another storm came up, and the pump couldn't keep up, and it sank the vessel along with the pump. And so the pump is still now underwater on this vessel. But I like to call these the original transformers. They had all these different innovative components to them, where they could, anything that was hanging over the side of the vessel, it was all hinged so that they could bring it all aboard the vessel, so they could build the ship bigger to fit inside the lock dimension. So here you can see a vessel being pulled out of the lock. And this is a drawing of one at the time. So the bowsprit could be raised and lowered. The davits on the end of the vessel could be flipped backwards, and then the cat heads, which held the anchors, could also be folded in. So here you can see one of those stern davits. There's a hinge on it. Most vessels were not built with that. And then here you have the cat head where the anchor would have been. It also has a hinge, and it could be brought forward. And then the bowsprit, this whole thing lifted up and could be brought in, which is really exciting. Here you can see the kind of pin and lock in that system. Then we also have some more modern shipwrecks. So this is the Finn McCool. It was built in 1926 and abandoned in 1964. And it was just a work barge essentially up in Lake Superior. It's now in 3 feet of water in Bayfield, Wisconsin. So if you've ever stayed up in Bayfield at the Seagull Bay Motel, this is like right below it. You can kind of see the hotel up at the top there. Anyway, it worked on Lake Superior for about 40 years. And so basically just the pumps failed at the dock, and they towed it out a little bit, and they just let it sink. But it's a more modern vessel. It was in use till 1964. And all the mechanical components are still on this, like this giant winch. And it's a really great wreck because it's in shallow water. Here, there's part of it. This is in a year of low water. Part of it's sticking up. So we use it a lot to tell people, if you want to go experience shipwrecks and you're not a diver, you're a kayaker or a boater, this is one of those ones that you can see, and it really helps with our kind of outreach and education component with that. So yeah, with that, if you want to learn more about shipwrecks, we have a website that's hosted and designed by and everything by Wisconsin Sea Grant. So it's just wisconsinshipwrecks.org, and so we put all of our information, images, and different pieces of historical information up on that website too. And so you can go take a look at that to learn a little bit more. With that, I'd like to thank you all. Sorry, I went over by about 5 minutes, but I do thank you guys very much for that. And yeah, if we have any questions, I think Anne is where we're at.
Yeah.
I'm
So
happy.
we do have one question from Susan. She was really interested about the photo mosaics and the drawings you do.
Yeah.
So can you just talk a little bit more about how you do that? Do you use your photography that you bring these photos up? And I know you do the drawings. Do you want to talk a little bit more in the measuring about that?
Sure. Yeah. So there's two different ways to do it. There's drawing to scale underwater, and then there's doing annotated drawings. So generally when you start learning how to draw underwater, we have students physically draw to scale. So every student gets a 10-foot by 10-foot section of the shipwreck. And you use your little, you have graph paper on your slate. So we basically just use mechanical pencils and Mylar, which is, just the plasticized paper to draw, and it works perfectly underwater. But so you basically just draw everything, onto this graph paper to scale. It takes a little bit longer to do that underwater. So as we move forward, we do more annotated drawings. So basically you just draw what you see, kind of do a little sketch of what the shipwreck looks like. And then you take different measurements to different points from this main baseline that we have to determine, how big something is, how wide something is. Then when we come up out of the water, we take those drawings, those little pieces of chicken scratch, essentially, and we transpose that to graph paper at that time. And so that's when we really have to start doing a lot of this, math and doing technical drawings. People always ask, you have to be a good artist to do this. And I'm like, not really. I just use rulers and straight lines and different things to kind of measure out where things are. So we put that all on the graph paper. And then, so that's all done to scale then at that point. And then we take another piece of Mylar and we basically just use, like drafting pens, and we ink everything. So it's just tracing everything over. And then we take that and we take it to a big scanner. There's computer programs that can do this. And so a lot of places have now switched over to using Adobe Illustrator to do this instead of inking it by hand. But for us, it takes a little bit longer, but to me, I feel like you can get more details into the drawing when you're inking it. And so then that's when if we've taken a lot of pictures, we use those pictures to then add in detail. So, we have a basic measurement of something, but if there was, a particular, something had a particular detail on it, we can then draw that in, using those images that we use. And then we take that all to a big scanner and get a scanned version of it and digitize it so that we can then share it with people and put it on the website.
That's very cool. I know you share those dive plates with recreational divers, so they can use them to visit the wrecks. So next week we're going to do invasive species, and so it's an interest of a lot of people, like what is the effect of invasive species on shipwrecks? And you alluded that a little bit. So as an archaeologist, what is your big worry about the zebra mussels and quagga mussels and the impact on the lake? And then second, are there any other challenges that you want to mention that you worry about in terms of the preservation of the wrecks?
Yeah. So as I, kind of mentioned with the Wisconsin, I don't know what is going on with my camera, so I am sorry.
You look great.
It keeps zooming in and out, and I'm like, whatever. I'm just gonna.
You're a celebrity.
I don't know what's going on. So with the zebra and it's mostly quagga mussels now. With all of that, it's very the work we've done with these metal shipwrecks. It's very new kind of for us to look into this, but the results that we're finding and then talking to divers even since then, the fact that these metal wrecks are they are collapsing in on each other. So the only real, difference that there's been, I mean, most of these metal wrecks, they've been underwater already as it is for, almost 100 years, and they were fine for a very long time. And now in the last, 25 years, they've suddenly started to collapse a lot, collapse a lot more. So the concern is that if we don't, go down and record these shipwrecks now, that in another 50 years, we might not be able to access them and get all these information about them. Because the metal will have collapsed too much on it. The Milwaukee Car Ferry is kind of the same way. That one, the bottom portion of it, it's made out of steel, whereas just the top portion is made out of iron. And so that's another interesting thing where the steel doesn't seem to be degrading, but the upper portion, if you could see in that picture where I showed the bathtubs, like that whole thing used to be like upright metal, and it's all just collapsed down on it. So that's one of the concerns with that, is really the metal shipwrecks. The wooden shipwrecks seem to be doing okay with it. The concern with that is the zebra mussels actually or the quagga mussels actually drill into it a little bit to attach to the wood. So when you pull it off, if anybody pulls it off, it'll pull part of the shipwreck with it. So that's kind of something to be, or if you knock something off, it can pull some of the shipwreck, but in general, they're doing okay. But other than that, in terms of preservation, it's anchoring into the shipwreck, and also when divers go down to things, just kind of like opening drawers or just, touching things. Even though the wooden shipwrecks are still pretty sturdy, there's different things that can definitely break really easily if you don't mean to. There's one called the Robert Pringle where the first divers, nobody had found the shipwreck. Somebody found the shipwreck. Divers went to it. There was a whole set of drawers in the cabin, or in the pilot house, that were all closed and intact. And then first divers went down there, got some pictures of it. Then later divers who have gone to it, most of those drawers are now open or broken, because divers have tried to open it to see what's inside. And so there's, different pieces like that can damage shipwrecks. If people try to go to shipwrecks and actually hook into it and anchor into it, there's numerous places across the Great Lakes where a whole section of railing has come off because a ship that was too heavy tried to anchor into it. So we try to put safe moorings to a lot of these wrecks so that you can anchor in, or you can tie into that, and then it's attached to a spot either off the shipwreck or a spot on the shipwreck that is not that was meant to have that much weight put on it. So
thanks. We have another sort of big question from Matt. Oh, well, I'll just say it. He asks, how does the shifting climate affect your work, both as a diver and also as a maritime archaeologist? Really good question.
That's a good question. It's one of those things that definitely, what we've noticed recently too is water temperature. Which changes in the Great Lakes all the time, because it's so wind driven. So it depends, but normally it's 42 degrees at the bottom of Lake Michigan, no matter where you are, no matter how the weather's been. But we were just recently on a wreck in 85 feet of water, and it was 64 degrees on the bottom, which I've never experienced. I've experienced 50-degree water down to about 50 feet, but I've never experienced 64-degree water at 80 feet. So, one of the things we say about what preserves these wrecks so well is the cold water that has, it's got low oxygen. And so if the water temperatures start to get warmer more regularly at those depths, that could potentially lead to, enhanced degradation of a lot of these shipwrecks. Again, that was just something, it might have just been a weird weather thing that we noticed, but whatever it is. So that's a potential concern. The changing water levels in Lake Michigan, which I know are, it changes, regularly, but especially with the recent high water, there's a lot more sand movement that's coming in and out. And so shipwrecks are becoming covered and uncovered, which when they're covered, they're really well protected, which is actually really nice. But then, as the water levels move, the like underwater, where the dunes or the different sandbars are underwater move. And so shipwrecks become uncovered. And when they're uncovered and they've been covered for a long time, then they can quickly kind of start to degrade a little bit more too. So there's always kind of that as well. And things washing out of beaches. We just recorded a piece of shipwreck that's been, it's on the beach, and like nobody had known it was there because it was literally in a dune for many, many years. And then with the high water levels, that dune has washed away. And now the shipwreck, this piece of shipwreck, which I'm sure at some point in time in history, it was, had to get there somehow. But now people on the shore have access to it and can start, a lot of people just don't know that they're not supposed to touch something like that, or not supposed to, break off a piece or whatever it might be. So that's where a lot of the education and outreach comes for our job too, is to try to inform people that these are historic resources. Please leave them, please try not to touch them. So, yeah, there's that. And then again, with the, like the mussel infestation and the things like that. Also with the changing, the increased sunlight that we have now in Lake Michigan, there's more cladophora, and the cladophora, causes its own kind of, we don't really know what yet, but it's around shipwrecks a lot more now than it used to be. So
yeah, wow, some big questions and big worries, I'm sure, for you as a professional. So I'm going to ask one more question. There are a couple other ones too that we may follow up with you and ask on email. It could be something really quickly that and then I'll share those with the group. But Brian, I like this question only because it's good to get people out engaged in it, not just to listen to on Zoom. But so 2 questions. Can a person go and see artifacts? And also, can they go, do you have you mentioned the Bayfield nearshore wreck, or is there another 1 or 2 favorites you would suggest for people to go look at? Because I think that's a really neat way to see it.
Yeah, definitely. So as far as artifacts and seeing artifacts, so we have, we don't actively pull anything up, as I mentioned, and because all the sites are protected. However, many people in years past have brought up artifacts. And so there are plenty of artifacts from shipwrecks in Wisconsin, from all over the Great Lakes, that exist up out of the water. And so the Wisconsin Maritime Museum has a ton of really great artifacts. So if you're in Manitowoc, they've got a lot of great things. We at the Historical Society, we're working on our new museum. And once that happens, there's going to be a whole shipwreck exhibit. We have a lot of artifacts as well. That's another great place to see it. The Port Washington, the lighthouse has like a couple of artifacts too. There's places in Milwaukee, basically any maritime museum, the Door County Maritime Museum, both of them in Sturgeon Bay and Ellison Bay, they have, or Gills Rock, not Ellison Bay, Gills Rock, have a bunch of artifacts too that you can see. If you are a diver, feel free to go dive and look at all the artifacts underwater. There's still a ton of them down there too. Yeah, there's still a ton of them down there too. But also, like, not outside of Wisconsin, there's the National Museum of the Great Lakes has some really cool stuff, and that's over in Toledo. The Dawson Museum in Detroit has some really great stuff. Up in Duluth, there's the Army Corps Museum up there as well that has some really great stuff. So there's just basically any maritime museum across the Great Lakes is going to have some really cool artifacts that you can take a look at and go see, and has them on display. As far as if you want to go see a shipwreck in the wild, we worked a couple of years ago with the Wisconsin DNR. And so we have, because we were finding all of these shallow water shipwrecks, and we were discovering that kayakers just have no idea that they're there. And so there's the Lake Michigan State Water Trail, and actually the Lake Superior State Water Trail for the state of Wisconsin. There's a layer of shipwrecks on those interactive maps online now. And so any shipwreck that's in like 15 feet or shallower, that's close enough to shore, we have location information and some brief history of all of those different shipwrecks. Yeah, so you can go, kayak to them, boat to them. Some of them are close enough to shore, you can swim out to them from the beach, just different places. And it also shows like public access points as well. so that if you're planning a kayak trip, you can do that as well.
Well,
So
someone else
I
will put the trails list.
Yeah.
I just put the waterfall list just because. So I'm just going to wrap us up only because we want to ask you some career questions, but I do want to tell you that a lot of our participants say, thank you, that was great, awesome, as I'm not surprised.
You're welcome.
So we've been doing this interesting thing where we talk with our professionals about kind of their career and how they got there, because I think there's not a lot of people that know that this is a career, a job, a passion that you can do. And so we have some questions to ask you, if you don't mind, and this is for Sophie as well. And you both have like this really cool career. If you would both just, and so we have about 10 minutes, just so you know, I'm just gonna try to keep to the time. And I hate cutting this short because I think shipwrecks could be like a week-long education thing. So I do apologize for the short time. But basically, like, just describe a little bit, both of you, your career trajectory. How did you get to 2021 where you're sitting right now, besides turning on the Zoom?
Sophie, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
I can go first.
Sure.
I'm a little newer in the field, but Caitlin and I actually went to the same graduate school. She was a few years ahead of me in the program. So I was a competitive swimmer and water polo player. So water had been a huge part of my life. I was a swim instructor and studied history also in undergrad. And I was looking for active jobs in history. It was a literal Google search, and maritime archaeology was one of the first things that came up. And after about a week of studying, learning about it, I was like, this is what I am supposed to do. And since then, I've also combined my love of working with kids. So I've worked in different maritime museums. If anybody's familiar with the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum up in the UP, I've worked 2 seasons there as a preservation specialist / educator. And then I also worked at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum in Vermont as an educator there as well. So I love teaching kids specifically about these maritime topics, but it has been a long time dream of mine to get to Wisconsin, so I'm happy to be here now.
And you, Caitlin?
Yeah, for me, it's actually a very similar story. As I mentioned, I was like, as a kid, I was obsessed with everything Titanic. And so that was always just kind of my, and maritime history always of the Great Lakes always really interested me. But I never thought it was something I could do as an actual job. And so I was studying history and geography when I was in my undergrad program, which I went in Kenosha, Wisconsin, so right along Lake Michigan. And I was trying to decide what to do after graduation. And I was like, well, I should probably go to grad school for history. And like, maybe I could do maritime history as like my focus for grad school, because you have to pick a focus in history. I'm like, that would be cool. So I started looking for programs that are like maritime history. And I literally did a Google search and came across the program at East Carolina University, which was housed in the history department, but was an archaeology program. So I didn't really have any archaeology background, but I was like, well, it's a history program, so I have a history degree, so let's try it. And then I got in, and so that's kind of how that happened. And then after my first year there, I got an internship here at the Historical Society just for the summer. And then went back to do my second year in North Carolina, and a position happened to open up within that year. And then I was able to, after I was done with classes, come back to the Historical Society. And then I've been here ever since. So awesome. Not something I ever anticipated leaving the Midwest. I was definitely like, I'm going to be on the coast somewhere. And then in the course of, one of our professors was originally from Green Bay and did a lot of work up in the Great Lakes. And so I got kind of involved, and I was like, oh yeah, maritime history and the Great Lakes. I've always been interested in that. And then that's kind of how I ended up coming back up here. So
it's the cold water. I think people that love Great Lakes shipwrecks really like cold water, because that's what it's all about. So I think it's really interesting that the Wisconsin Historical Society is 3 women archaeologists. Have you faced any challenges in your careers as women in this field?
I mean, I think definitely. So our other coworker, Tamara Thompson, she's been in this field a little bit longer than the rest of us. And she's been she was a diver first and foremost. And so diving has always been also a pretty male dominated field. And it has archaeology. And so I think she's had a lot more experience with that in her time in the various places that she's worked. But like for me, I know my very first program or my class at East Carolina was mostly female. And that was the first time they'd ever had a class of mostly female people, females going into maritime archaeology. And we were also the largest class that they'd ever had. So you could tell they didn't really know what to do with us at first, but like, it was never something, every once in a while, I guess you could say you come across people that are, especially old time divers, that are more, trying to be helpful when it comes to getting things together, or we recently had a lot of issues with our boat engine. And so, when different things like that happen, it's like, no, we know we got it, like it's fine. So different experiences in that sense. But, when it comes to the actual diving portion of it, I think it's changed a lot recently, especially in maritime archaeology. There's a lot more women going into maritime archaeology. And so today, if you look up the makeup of a lot of programs across the country, both on the state, federal, and private level, there are a lot more females in places of in leadership roles, in kind of top down everywhere. So that's really, I think it changed within the last probably 15-ish years, 10, 15 years. So that's something that's really cool to see. But I don't know, Sophie, if you have other experiences.
Well, I think what they told us after Caitlin's year is that for the most part, because my class wasn't mostly women, but it was more women than men, it was smaller than Caitlin's class. But I think it's just the general supposition, like Caitlin's talking about a lot of these older guys who have been on boats or diving for so long. It's just the supposition that they need to help you, whether it's fixing something on the boat, carrying your gear. It's like, if you are a diver, you know how to take care of yourself and your own gear. But fortunately, in our field, it's, at least in my experience, it's fairly easy to prove yourself fairly quickly. You get in the water and you're mostly covered up, and how you are conducting yourself underwater says it all, whether you are male or female. I grew up in a very athletic, have to prove yourself as a competitor background. So I think that mindset has really helped me in my field. I'm also 6'1", so I feel like I don't get the damsel in distress stereotype as often as some of the other girls in my program who were like 5'3". But it is, I remember when we came up to Wisconsin for field school, and we were working off of the Dawn Treader, our little research vessel. So it's an open boat, and this fishing vessel came by, and our dive safety officer at the time even had dreadlocks and long blonde hair. So from the back, he looked like a woman. And the fisherman on board made a comment that there was a research vessel going out that was all women. And I remember looking at him and being like, is there a problem with that? Like, yes, we're going to go to work right now. But like, as Caitlin said, it's changing. And I feel like, Caitlin and Tammy, you've got Carrie Soden over at the National Museum of the Great Lakes. Like, there are, especially in the Great Lakes region, there's a lot of women in this field that are saying, we're here and we're doing great work.
And, thinking about your professional practice, this issue of safety underwater, it doesn't, you have to, there's no gender thing with that. You just go under, and it's important that everyone works together,
Yes.
So we've had interesting responses to that question from scientists. They may have a different experience. So it's kind of interesting. So we're butting up on time, but I want to ask one more question about mentoring, because here we have teachers that are leading children and mentoring in their own way, as they move through their educational path. But so have you guys, either of you, ever had mentors, and what was your ideal mentor relationship? Like, what would you share with these teachers of how to mentor a person who's interested in this work?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I mean, I think, again, this kind of goes back to the same like answer that I was giving before of like, they didn't really know what to do with our class. So there's, in terms of mentoring, I think it was just a lot of, more freedom to explore different components of the field of maritime, but then also because like my advisor, the person from Green Bay, it was a very hands-off, yeah, it was a very hands-off kind of person, but if you went and asked him questions, he would talk your ear off about different things. And so it was more of a you know, like he would facilitate the research, but then it was like to give me the opportunity to take it then on myself to know that I definitely knew, you know, knew what I was talking about and knew what I was doing. It like, that might seem like it doesn't go together, but it really kind of allowed me to take ownership of my own like experience in terms of learning things, but at the same time, like I didn't feel like I was just like flung out into the, you know, into the nether region. So it's like there was always kind of a net of somebody to come. But I know a lot of other people, and that's just happens to be how I operate. You know, I'd rather just be, you know, given the reins to kind of, you know, go, but I can't, you know, totally run off the cliff. Like, you know, there would be somebody there to stop that. But so definitely that was really, really helpful for me in terms of mentoring, but then also just like, as I guess, as I was growing up, just having different people and teachers, and especially when I was in like undergrad and I was first like, I think I'm going to go do this thing. You know, like some of our professors would be a little bit glib, you know, about things, but like that was just his personality. But at the same time, it's like there was always that support. So like in certain classes, it was like, well, I think I might want to do this. They were like, well, you know, do this next research paper on something that, you know, has to do with that, and then see if it's something that you're actually interested in. And, you know, the same kind of thing when I got to grad school, it was kind of, well, hey, there's this ship up in Wisconsin, like, why don't you do this research paper on it and see if it's something you're interested in? And then that ended up becoming my thesis project. And so, you know, that kind of, you know, leadership, or I don't know if that's necessarily mentoring, but just kind of a, you know, here, you know, try this. If you don't like it, that's okay. We can try something else.
Giving you that
But
confidence and that, you know,
yeah,
giving you the
yeah,
opportunity to lead your learning. That seems like
right. Yeah,
a great
that's a good way to
approach.
put
And it
it.
sounds like it
Yeah.
worked for you really well.
Yeah, and
So,
I think
oh,
it helped, you know, oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, I think that helped me then when, you know, in my professional career as well,
yeah.
just being able to have that confidence as well.
Yeah. I watch you guys. It's like, oh my gosh, they're so brave and so, yeah. Sophie, did you have anything to add?
I mean, Caitlin said it really well. Like Brad is he was our silent cheerleader. Like you knew he was supporting you, even though unless you specifically went and talked to him, he never said a word. But one thing he and I had a conversation about, because our field as a whole is relatively new. It's been developed within the last, you know, 60, 70 years as a profession.
Sure.
And because of that, we were encouraged to take it and run with it in the direction we want to go. So like, you know, there are no two people in my class who have the same job. I don't think there's any two people in Caitlin's class who have the same job. Like we were encouraged to find what within that broad spectrum of maritime studies that we wanted to focus on and to go with that. So that's something that I've had throughout my life with different educators, is just to like encouraging your kids to pursue what they're passionate about. Because like Caitlin said, like I said, you know, in a million years, this would be a cool job, but who thinks that this is actually a career? And then it turns out that it is. So that's something especially when I'm working with kids, I like to tell them too. If you'd asked me when I was in 5th grade if I was going to be a scientist, I would say you were absolutely crazy.
Same. Same.
But I was able to combine like my love of the water and my love of being active and history, and combine it into a job that I love now.
Oh, and I think Brian just wrote inspiring career journey and inspiring for young kids. I would totally agree with that. So it's 10:19. So I would like to give our presentation a big round of applause. I'm sure all of you are doing the same in your Zoom room. So we have a really quick break for bio needs right now. So it's 10:19. So please, if you would, oh, I'm seeing all the hands. I love that. If you would just be back here ready to rock and roll at 25 past, please. And thanks again to Caitlin. And we're looking forward to hearing from Sophie. So that'll be the next, right? Is that right? Oh no, but we might have a couple of questions, a little trivia or one question. All right, so enjoy your bio break. I'm going to go get some coffee. And thanks again, Caitlin.
Guys.
I want to mention to Caitlin and Sophie, after a brief break at around 10:50, we do these joyful hours. So you guys are more than welcome to join us for joyful hour. If you want to, we'll put you in a breakout room with some of the teachers online, give you a chance to talk with them directly if you have time. I know you guys are busy right now, but just let us know and Cole can assign you to a room. So. All right, well, it's 10:25, so I'm kind of that timekeeper lady today. So we'll have one quick question before we start, and it's a trivia question. And again, throw your answers in the chat. And again, I always tell the kids, you know, the air grew damp, a storm rolled in, and snow began to fly. Just maybe a clue there with the word snow. Anybody have a guess of what shipwreck this is about? Oh, Matt from Minnesota guesses the Edmund Fitzgerald. I do believe there's a more famous song. Is that from the famous song? Oh, Brian from Wisconsin is guessing the sea, the Christmas ship. Any other guessers, or we're just coming back from and Alyssa also chimes in with the sea. Yeah, you know, in fact, it is the Christmas ship. Lee Murdoch, a very famous singer in Wisconsin. He's a beautiful folk singer for years and was inspired by maritime history and wrote about the Christmas ship. It's a really great children's book that I meant to have with me and I forgot about the Christmas ship that tells the story. The funny thing about that song, if you look it up, The Christmas Ship by Lee Murdoch, it's so joyful. It's like the most joyful song about a shipwreck. It's so jaunty and happy, which is kind of funny. But I think he was really excited about the fact that the widow of the captain continued on with the tradition. And if you don't know the story, check it out. It's pretty fun. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our next speaker, Sophie Stewart. You've heard from her already, but I just want to give her a quick introduction because she'll be talking about a really cool education program that they have recently launched. And Sophie Stewart is a maritime archaeologist also with the Historical Society in Wisconsin. And she was hired to test and implement a new shipwreck program for children. She's originally from Portland, Oregon, yay, Northwest, but fell in love with history of Great Lakes after participating in the Wisconsin Field School that she mentioned while she was pursuing her master's degree. Sophie's worked as a preservation specialist and educator in many different maritime museums throughout the Great Lakes, and now is happy to call Wisconsin home, another transplant. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over you to Sophie to go ahead and share away.
Thank you. So I'm going to be very considerate of everybody's time and try and blitz through this really quickly. I, as Anne mentioned, am a maritime archaeologist also for the Wisconsin Historical Society, but I was hired specifically to test this children's program. And this was originally supposed to be in person, but as we all know, COVID threw a wrench in absolutely everything. And so we fortunately had the resources to make it a computer program. So this is an informal education program at this time. It does not adhere to any state standards currently. It contains 6 different activities and is geared toward the 3rd through the 6th grade. And it is designed to be administered by a maritime archaeologist, so that way questions can be answered and discussions can come up as a result of the activities. It's very relaxed and play focused for the kids. And it was funded by a grant from University of Wisconsin Sea Grant to the Wisconsin Historical Society. So in the spring, we were testing this with 11 different museum and historical society partners throughout the Great Lakes, the majority of which are in Wisconsin, but we had a few in Michigan and one in Ohio. So those organizations were either hosting an event where we tested the program, or they were connecting me with different educators or scout troop leaders in their communities to test the program with them individually. So as a result of all of those connections, I tested this program 26 times this spring with grades first grade all the way up to 7th grade. So the majority of the kids were in that 3rd through 6th grade range, but it was nice to get some feedback from kids that were a little older and kids that were a little younger. So we were asking for feedback from the kids and the educators during and after the presentations. So we got a lot of feedback, and my goal now is to fix some of those things over the summer and then test it again in the fall. So I'm going to take you guys on a short journey through, and it is not working again. So give me 1 second here. Screen share is always an interesting beast. So that should be working this time. Nope.
Oh, I love computers.
Take you guys through each of the program activities real quick. And it's going to be a bit of a whirlwind, so I apologize. But just to give everybody an idea of the different types of things that we're doing with the kids. And it's not going to come up. So what we're going to do is I prepared a PowerPoint just in case this happened. So instead of going through the activities on their own, you'll just be seeing a screenshot of it. So can we go to the next slide? There we go. So this is the stuff that I just went through. So there are 6 different activities, and the first one is Dress the Diver. So this activity is introducing scuba diving and the equipment to the kids, which at this age, not a lot of them know a lot about. So they are dragging and dropping each piece of equipment onto the scuba diver. It's kind of like a virtual paper doll. And when they do that, after each piece is dragged, some information pops up to tell them more about that piece. So a lot of the kids are really curious about different pieces of the equipment specifically. They often ask me how long one tank of air lasts. So that's always an interesting discussion that follows. And lots of different things like that. The kids' feedback for this activity in the spring was that there's too much text on this activity. So I get, as you have already seen from Caitlin and I, get very excited when talking about shipwrecks. And I did that when I created this program or was fixing different elements of this activity. And so that's something that I see that the kids have told me, okay, we need to dial this back and have it be more of a conversation rather than having them read a paragraph about what each piece of equipment does. The next activity is Parts of a Ship. And this is a change that has already been made. So we actually started calling this ship vocabulary, but as you can imagine, a lot of the elementary school kids had a very negative connotation with the word vocabulary. So I am interested to see if the popularity of this activity goes up just by changing the name. But Caitlin briefly mentioned photo mosaics in her program, and we utilize them in this program as well. Photo mosaics give an amazing view of the entire ship, whereas as Caitlin can attest to, or I can, in our work, it is very rare that we are seeing something as clear as this while we're diving. So this is the Galley Nipper, and the kids for this one will read a series of definitions about different pieces of a ship, and then they are dragging and dropping that onto the part that it describes on the photo mosaic. This one doesn't get a lot of questions because it's usually pretty straightforward. The next activity is Artifact Match. So we have 3 different stories that they can read. They can read the story of the Milwaukee that Caitlin mentioned, the home, or the Atlanta. The Atlanta has a special place in my heart because it is the shipwreck that brought me up to the Great Lakes for the first time, and the first time I worked with Caitlin and Tammy. So for this activity, the kids read the story of the shipwreck on their own, and they're encouraged to look for clues about what type of artifacts might have been found on this wreck. So we talk about what an artifact is and why they're important to archaeologists. And then after they read, they go to a matching activity. So for the basic level, the 3rd, 4th, the boxes are labeled to tell the kids what they're looking for. And in the intermediate level, they're not. So this has been an interesting activity. The kids, usually once they match it, the definition pops up. So that was something that was a little frustrating for them. So to change it in the fall, we're going to have the definitions pop up beforehand so they have a little better idea of what the things are. And I also want to make it more of a discussion because the kids were getting frustrated that things weren't specifically mentioned in the story. And as an archaeologist, that seems kind of obvious to me that yes, we're looking for the missing pieces. We're reading between the lines. And we were hoping to get the kids excited about that kind of investigative process, but it wasn't working. And they were just getting frustrated. So we're going to change this activity a bit for the fall, and I'm excited to see how it goes. The next one is puzzles, which is the crowd favorite by far. So there's 5 different choices of different types of ships that were used on the Great Lakes. There's scows, which Caitlin mentioned, passenger steamers, side wheel steamers, schooners, which is the one here, and then tugboats. So the kids get to choose. They get a little sentence that describes the type of ship, and then they are dragging and dropping the puzzle pieces to assemble the ship. And then once that's done, a little fun facts section pops up to tell them more about it. And we link in this activity the wisconsinshipwrecks.org website so they can learn more about it. And so I just want to plug that again for all of you out there in education, whether it's elementary school all the way up to, I've seen some people on here teach at the high school level. If you are interested in incorporating shipwrecks into your curriculum, that site is an amazing way to do it. You know, just encouraging the kids to explore, pick a shipwreck, and write a couple paragraphs on it. I mean, some of those pages on that website have pages and pages of information on the wreck, and some of them only have a few sentences because it's a wreck that we know little to nothing about. So it's an excellent resource that we encourage the kids at this age to use, or at least to start exploring all the way up to the high school level. The next activity is find your route. And so Caitlin was talking about the importance of maritime trade routes on the Great Lakes and how they really contributed to the expansion of this region and a lot of the surrounding region in the Midwest. So for this one, the kids pick a ship, and we do this all together. So for this one, I have the Atlanta up here. They are reading the instructions of what like the standard route would have looked like for that ship, and then they're drawing it on a map of either Lake Michigan itself or some of the intermediate ones. It's the entire Great Lakes. So those get a little more complicated for the 5th and 6th grade. And then after they do it, there's a check my route button that you see here. So then a line pops up to show them what the most direct route was that the ship would have actually traveled. And then we discuss it. We talk about how close they were to the actual route. We go over basic cardinal directions, which is part of the 4th grade curriculum in Wisconsin. So we discuss the directions that the ship went on its different parts of the route. And then for each individual ship in the program, the discussion questions from there on are different. So for this one with the Atlanta, because it's in one of the ones that's in the year 1900, we talk about why were many people still using ship transportation then? So I get the kids thinking about, okay, well, were cars as popular or as common? Were they as safe? Things like that. So that always sparks a good conversation. And we also talk about the price. So back in the early 1900s on a passenger steamer like the Atlanta, you could do a 24-hour trip around Lake Michigan for about $5. And that didn't include where you were sleeping or the food you were eating, but for $7, that was included. So I have the kids brainstorm different things today that they can buy for $5 or $7. And it usually ends up being either a toy or some type of food, often candy. And it just gets their brains going about, okay, 120 years ago, this is what you could buy with $5. And now this is what you can buy. So that often rocks their world seeing how much that has changed. And then for the last activity, this is the one, for the most part throughout the program, the only difference between basic and intermediate is the vocabulary that's used. But for the last activity, it's a more complex activity. So for the word scramble, for the younger kids, they are going through reading the sentence and using context clues to figure out different reasons that ships sank on the Great Lakes. So we go through this and do it together as a group. It's a really good end bonding activity, and the kids get really excited to be who can be the first one to figure it out. And then for the intermediate level, same thing. They're figuring out different ways that ships sank on the Great Lakes, but this one is in a cryptogram style as opposed to a word scramble. So this is a bit more challenging, and it's been interesting because as with most word puzzle or word activities, as we know as educators, there's going to be kids that absolutely love it and kids that absolutely hate it, and not a lot in between. So it's definitely a hit and miss depending on the group and how much time I have to spend on the activity with them. But this one, usually for the kids that catch on, this ends up being their favorite activity because it challenges them and it's fun at the same time. So that's a very quick run through of the activities. And what we're planning for the fall, like I said, and you guys know better than anyone as educators, we have no idea what the fall is going to look like. And it may start as one thing and change very quickly. So what I am hoping to do is get a list of people who are potentially interested in testing this program in the fall. And then if you are, I will have your name on that list. And then when we get a better idea of whether I'm just going to be testing in virtually or a combination of virtually and in person, I could then reach out and we could figure out what you want to do specifically with your school group. So if anybody is interested in that, I am going to put my email in the chat. And you can reach out to me and I would be happy to take your class or a community group. This is not just limited to schools. We want to do this with as many different types of groups as possible. It was just easiest to get it into classrooms because teachers were looking for absolutely anything to supplement their virtual constant interaction with the kids. So I will also open it up to questions now if anybody has any questions. I see I've got one in here.
Cool.
What was that, Anne?
Deanne said it's very cool.
Oh, thank you.
If anybody has any questions, throw it in the chat. I had a question. So are there plans to expand it? One of the things I think maybe educators might see in this is the potential, when you hear Caitlin speak about,
Yes.
you know, there's a lot of math potential measuring and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Is there hope to expand it?
Yes, so we are actually in the process of hopefully obtaining an additional grant to continue, because we're in the end of this 2-year grant space for this portion of the project. So yes, there are hopes to expand this, all sorts of things to make it better, get it out to more audiences, and it will eventually be something that would just be available to the public on the Wisconsin Sea Grant website. But during the testing phase right now, it's very important that I'm moderating each portion. So somebody sent me a direct message on here. So no, this cannot currently be found on wisconsinshipwrecks.org because it's not available to the public because it still is in the testing phase. So if you are interested in testing this with your class, please send me an email and I will be happy to send you some more information.
There is one question, Sophie, that I think is really important. Brent has asked if there's any adaptation yet for different kinds of learners. So some audio, yes, or screen reading or anything like that. Have you got plans or is that already in place?
So those plans are in the works right now. That is something that was brought to my attention. This, like I said, was originally supposed to be an in-person activity. So it would have been very different discussing it as a group, group reading activities, little breakout rooms, things like that. But having to take it online meant putting a lot of text on the screen, because otherwise they're just listening to me lecture for an hour.
But is the tool going to have
yes, we're going to have an audio component. That's something we're adding this summer. If I do it with a first or second grade class, I either read or the teacher reads it for them. And then a goal potentially, long term, we're thinking for this program would be adding additional languages, etc., to make it more accessible to those groups as well. And I'm also looking at ways to tweak the activities a little bit. So if it's a student that potentially has issues with the technology aspect of it, the dragging and dropping, the drawing on the computer screen, ways to make that a little easier as well. So yes, those things are in the works. And that's all one of the many components of the testing phase that we have here.
Yeah, well, it is 10:45 and we do have a quick break. So obviously, Sophie kindly put her email in there, so I think she wants you to contact her. Yeah. Let's take a 3-minute stretch break. And then when we come back, I'm going to turn the reins over to my friend and colleague Cole to take this over. So let's reconvene in 3 minutes at 10:48 to do our joyful hour. Be joyful, love to be joyful. Anyway, I'm going to take my bio break because I
And Caitlin and I are also okay staying for the joyful hour.
Awesome.
For the breakout rooms. I'm not sure what your time frame is. I have an appointment that I have to leave for at 11:45.
Yeah, it goes till we'll be in the rooms till 11:20, and then we'll do a reporting out for 10 minutes. So I think they'd love to have you in the room with them because it's always a fun thing. So Cole will go ahead and put you in one room each. And so that'll be great. Thank you. Of course, now probably we won't get any of the work done in the room because they'll be just having a million questions for you guys. But yeah. And I'm going to write in the chat that thank you for some of these other questions. And what we do with our workshops is we forward on follow-up questions to our professionals, to our practitioners, and they usually right away respond. So if you've asked a question that hasn't been covered, and I definitely have a couple of others as well, look for an email with that summary forwarded just in a couple of days. Our presenters have been really great. So don't think your questions will go unanswered. So Cole, it is 10:48. So you are welcome to begin as you wish.
Yeah, we've had some people who apparently couldn't stay all the way through the end. So our breakout rooms are going to be a little bit different than we originally intended. And before I cast everyone into their breakout rooms, I do just want to take a second to say we had originally intended on having a 4th trivia question, but we're going to skip that for the sake of time. However, I have loaded the trivia questions into a document that you can access through our website. So if anyone is curious on what that was going to be, you can still have a peek at it. So with that, I'm going to send everyone off. And we will see you back from the breakout room in about 25 or 30 minutes. So we've got a few of you that didn't go. So let me shuffle you off here. Hello.
Hi, I got knocked out of my group.
I think I had you in
I was
group
with-
1. Is that right? With
With
Anne?
Anne?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. 1 second. Hello.
Hey, we all came back. We were having a great conversation. And by we, I mean it was mostly Eric and Matt and Caitlin, which is exactly how it's supposed to be. So that was awesome.
Great. Did you lose Susan?
Yeah, she let us know she had to go,
Okay.
or she went to that Van Gogh art display.
Okay. I think we're just waiting. Oh, here. Okay. Everybody looks like they're back now. Welcome back. So hopefully you all had a really great time in your breakout rooms. So what we would like to do is just take a few minutes to go around and have somebody from your group report out on some of the things that you talked about, any great ideas or things you might like to share. So let's start with group 1, which was Anne's group. Would somebody like to lead off and kind of paraphrase what you discussed?
Brian, you might want to unmute yourself because you're saying some great things.
There we go. Yeah, as a spokesperson here, I will talk a little bit about what we covered. First of all, Brent looked at the antelope unnarrated footage. He's going to use the footage from the unnarrated version to be a pre-lesson activity to spark students' interest. A lesson could be turned into scavenger hunt looking for specific things. He has younger students teaching K through 4. A coloring sheet, maybe start a discussion about technology, design challenges for collecting footage underwater. His interdisciplinary shipwrecks, underwater biology, history could all tie in with that. The narrator version would be great for older students for maritime archaeology. The activity would be unnarrated. Post-activity could use a narrated version, is what he talked about. Also, we talked about maybe using the structure of the boat for older kids, maritime archaeology, creating an engineering challenge, to build a boat and test the boat in the field or in the classroom, depending on where you are. Then our discussion shifted a little bit to story maps, and Olivia talked about using those to provide visuals for students, taking them actually to shipwreck sites and paddle over the shipwrecks to give them kind of a firsthand experience actually seeing a shipwreck. So, yeah, integration of those experiences really brings the whole place-based philosophy into perspective. So I think that we had a great discussion.
It does sound like a great discussion. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else in the group have any comments they want to add before we move on to group 2? Okay, so group 2 was Marty's group, I believe, and I think you were a little short-staffed in your group, but hopefully you still had a great discussion.
Oh, we did, because we had really great people in our group. Everyone's great, though. I made it sound like somehow we were greater, which is not true. But we had a really good discussion. Would anyone like to share out, or would you like me to take a crack at that? Hearing nothing from my group, I'm guessing that means they would like me to lead the charge. So we strayed a little bit from the assignment, just kind of based on grade levels and I think interests that were represented in our group. We did have Susan Juries with us, who is the person who took the lead in developing the deep dives curriculum. And she was very excited to hear that it's being used and that she is looking for ways to maybe expand into different areas. Something such as, teaching, expanding into math areas and things like that. She thinks could be an appropriate way to take some next steps in the shipwrecks stories piece. Matt, he teaches 9th grade earth science, and he actually helped pilot a Shipwrecks GIS project that was being put together. He really enjoyed the career path information that Caitlin was able to share. Caitlin, we were also lucky that Caitlin was a part of our group as well. So there was a lot of good conversation just back and forth between those folks, and I mostly stayed quiet, which for those of you who have been in other workshops with me know that I'm a talker, not a listener. So that can be hard for me. But so that's what we got there. Eric was interested particularly in the chemistry and physics that relate to ships and shipwrecks, and maybe the interactions with invasive species, just given the teaching load and the things that he does. And so there was some good discussion about the impacts of quagga mussels or mussels in general, but why quagga mussels more. And so Caitlin talked about them being a little bit bigger and that mass may have some impact. And there's this also very curious thing that lots needs to be learned about it, but there has been a discovery of a production of carbonic acid that forms as a layer beneath these quagga mussel beds. It sort of sandwiches between the quagga mussels and the ship. And the question is, what kind of impact does that have on the structural integrity of the ship? Which I think is super curious. And so if there's this weakening of a structure based on this, how does that play with other abiotic factors like wind events? Is there more damage to the ship? Things like that. Are there implications as it relates to climate change? Like really good questions and research that needs to be done, an identified need there. Matt was also pretty interested in the ROV stuff, and Caitlin responded about ROVs being a plus just because of the time you can use to view the wrecks. Divers, of course, have a limited amount of time, especially depending on the depth of the wreck. And I was thinking about other things related to different kinds of lessons that could possibly be spun up based on the feedback that I was hearing. But I do see that we've only got 2 minutes left, so I think I'm going to stop talking for now. And we did talk very, very briefly about the actual homework assignments, but that wasn't the meat of our discussion.
Well, that's all right. It still sounds like it was a fascinating conversation. Sorry to have to cut you short. So our last group is Ginny's group. So if you have someone willing to share out and just kind of give us the meat and potatoes of your discussion. We can't. Oh, there you are. Sorry, that was a little lag.
Okay, I'll try to sum it up quickly. We talked a lot about making connections with the science and engineering, with actually building the boat, and also Lori shared an activity that she did this year combining science and social studies, and the book Paddle to the Sea, which by the way I already bought on Amazon while we were talking because it was really fascinating, and getting again kind of making things cross-curricular, so getting the engineering, the science, the social studies, and also the writing aspects, so getting kids to write. We talked about fostering a sense of stewardship, to having children understand that we have to take care of this Great Lake that's in our backyard, and also we talked about using the maritime museums that are in the area. They're developing a lot of really cool activities. I participated in one of them. It was great. And just, using the resources that we have. There's so many resources out there to help to teach kids about Great Lakes.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for sharing. I hate to run this conversation short, but we do want to leave you with just a few parting thoughts. And so we have a couple of notes here to share with you before we say goodbye. I'm just going to pop up. There they are. So we do have some information. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. Oh, sorry about that. Somehow or another, my PowerPoints got mixed up. All right, so we have a few notes here. We do want to point out to you all that we have a mentor program, and some of our mentors are here with us today. So if you are new to joining Sea Grant, or even if you've been to some of our Center for Great Lakes Literacy workshops in the past, but you'd like maybe someone to help you figure out how to go about integrating this material into your classroom, please let us know. We can hook you up potentially with one of our great mentor teachers, or maybe you've done some of this before and you're interested in helping others. Let us know and we can talk to you about how you could potentially become a mentor teacher yourself in our next cohort. And so there is a link here. And we will share that with you on the Trimming Our Sails Google site that you all should have access to. We also want to point out, again, we have this great program that's being spearheaded by Illinois and Indiana Sea Grant, but available to all states. It's their Students Ask Scientists program, and they are looking for teachers who are interested in having a scientist visit their classroom virtually. So if you would like more information about it, please visit the Seagull website. There is information about the Students Ask Scientists video chat program and a way for you to sign up. Oh, I guess actually, Anne, do you want to talk about these next few slides?
Yeah, sure. So I know, I'm hoping a lot of you have heard, but we have just been, Wisconsin has now a new National Marine Sanctuary. This is huge news. And it's not just for Wisconsin, but it is for the entire Great Lakes Basin. The sanctuary program is, in this case, is around shipwrecks or in Lake Michigan. So it sounds a bit Wisconsin-centric, but in fact, the education that they always do in these sanctuaries is amazing. In the Alpena Sanctuary in Michigan, there's tons of shipwreck resources. But so I just wanted to tell you that this is just a coup for the Great Lakes to have a sanctuary approved to protect our maritime resources. And so if you're a news reader, you'll be hearing more about this as time goes on. We at Sea Grant Programs will be connecting with the sanctuary program to make sure Great Lakes Literacy, our work is also well connected with them. So just a note of a happy thing that happened. So thanks. And I think there's a couple more, Cole.
Yep.
So there is a really, related to the sanctuary, there is this amazing, crazy thing going on around the Two Rivers area. Russ Green, who's the lead in Wisconsin for this new sanctuary, is an archaeologist, marine archaeologist himself. And he applied for a grant to the national NOAA to do some super duper crazy research, both in Wisconsin and I can't remember what the other lake was. I'm sorry. I should have remembered to look that up. But they're using like the craziest, highest tech mapping technology, ROV technology, autonomous ROVs, like really cool. So they've started an exhibition page. So it's something that's going to be going on over the month of August, and it's going to produce all kinds of really neat resources like bathymetry mapping, location of new shipwrecks. So just take that link. I think it'll be in the Trimming Our Sails Google site. It may be something as time goes on this coming school year, there'll probably be things in there to connect with your students. I just wanted to make you aware of it. And just finally, this is again a Wisconsin product. However, it's going to be definitely universally applicable to other states. So the field day is an educational game, kind of an incubator here at UW-Madison. They do the craziest cool stuff. And so they're working on an educational game for upper elementary that has students explore shipwrecks. So there's going to be several different levels. And it's really, the field day people really understand educational pedagogy. The people that have provided the content include the professional practitioners like Caitlin and Tammy. They also have had educator fellowships where teachers come and tell the game designers what kids need to learn and how to use it. So it's going to be a really neat thing. It'll be they'll make it a loud announcement. It's being supported by PBS Wisconsin, so it's a public radio or public television education resource. But the shipwrecks will be inspired by real shipwrecks, but they'll be not necessarily real Wisconsin shipwrecks. So just keep an eye out there. I mean, it might be a tool that your elementary students will enjoy using. So that's all. Blah, blah.
Well,
Chatty.
I think that's all for today. We just do want to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing many of you again next week. Next Wednesday, as you all know, is our part 2, and we will be focusing on aquatic invasive species. We have an amazing guest speaker from NOAA, Dr. Ashley Elgin, who is going to share some information on her research, which primarily focuses on invasive mussels. And then Marty Kitson, who is here with us today, will give us an overview of limnology and water quality. And she will be followed then by teacher Perry Smith, who is going to talk to us about a shipwreck story map that helps you incorporate teaching your students about aquatic invasive species and their effects on shipwrecks. So have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.